The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in a cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised. Caution. You are now entering the all-consuming realm of Shay's Paranormal Chat, where the things that are better left unsaid are actually said.
Shut up and sit down.
You're listening to Shay's Paranormal Chat. Paranormal podcasting done Shay's way. Tons of fun.
Dude, seriously?
A bit sarcastic.
Hashtag investigator, not hunter.
But always real.
Hashtag data, not evidence.
Don't get your panties in a twist.
Oh my god, really?
This is real, raw conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Good evening, everybody. TGIF. I am happy to be back live, and I believe this is Season 3, Episode 4, so thank you for everybody that's listening. Whether it's live now or listening later, we truly appreciate all the love and support we get from you. And yay, I'm happy to say my love, Kelly McCarville, is back with me. How you doing, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm good. I can't stray for too long. I go into Shay withdrawal.
I know. It's, it happens,
Yeah, and go figure. My calendar has been canceled forever, and then the season starts back up, and I'm like, yeah, I can't be there.
Yeah, that's how it goes, but, we understand. I'm pretty excited about tonight's guest. I was telling him before you joined us that I was a little nervous at first because of the religious aspect of it, and because I don't usually do that, but then I started doing all my research, and I'm pretty excited. We have Nathaniel J. Giliis. He's a religious demonologist and an author. How are you doing, Nathaniel?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. This is going to be really fun.
I'm excited.
Yeah. I want to start off with the book because once we get into the demonology, I don't want to forget the book part. So you have a book called A Moment Called Man that's available on Amazon, correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
For sure. I had, about 2 years ago now, I'd lost a good friend of mine to drug addiction. And he was an empath by nature. And for some reason, he was medicating the gift he was called to manifest. And so what I did is I wrote that book. Some of it is an homage to my religious tradition, but the majority of it is helping people who are empaths understand how to manifest their gifting and be comfortable in their own skin.
I like it.
Yeah, we're losing a lot of people in my generation from suicide even because they don't know how to hurt for other people. And so, yeah.
You're right. Yeah, I hear a lot of empaths that, especially once if they haven't figured out how to tell what's theirs and what's not theirs,
right.
If there's any underlying conditions as is, it can make it even worse.
Oh yeah, it just compounds on the problem. It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
But that's what the book's about.
That sounds awesome. It really does. And good for you for writing it.
Yeah, it's a very difficult time of my life because we were very close, and I was literally on Facebook one day just scrolling through statuses, and someone had tagged him and said that he had lost his battle with addiction. It just broke my heart. So, I wanted to reach people who may be in that same position, and that's really why I wrote it.
No, it's a good thing. People need to be reminded. They really do.
Definitely. It matters.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, what got you interested in the paranormal to begin with?
Well, I saw my very first full-bodied apparition at the age of 8 years old. My parents had purchased a new house in Dayton, Ohio. And even before we purchased it, we went into the open house. And my dad took me into what will be my room in the future. And he said, kind of take a look around, figure out where you're going to put your gaming system, where your bed's going to be. He said, Mom and I are going to be in the living room talking to the realtor. And so, I was a kid, so I'm curious. I'm opening not really, I think it was the closets. And, well, I was driven and drawn to the bed that was in the room. And so I just kind of casually knelt down and pulled the flap up, pulled the blanket up, and I was met face to face with about a 6-year-old girl. She was pale in complexion. She had beautiful long black hair. And I remember her having a very antiquated white linen dress on. And when we looked at each other, it was just, obviously it was horrifying to me as a kid. But then she kind of pushed herself all the way up against the wall, the furthest away from me. And so I didn't know where to place her. I had no real context. And so on the way home, I asked my dad, I said, I just saw a girl in that room. Is she part of the neighborhood, or did her parents forget about her? What happened? And she didn't belong to anybody because the owners of that home had passed away. They were elderly. And so I guess they either just gave it away or their kids sold it, but there was no 6-year-old girl to belong in that house at the time. So, once we moved into the house, I experienced a lot of malevolent phenomenon. There was a stench, a rancid stench of rotting. It's almost smelled like decomp, really, but it would fill the room at nighttime. I saw shadow figures. So that was my introduction into this field. And it was more like a confrontation than it was an introduction because I couldn't help it. It was just there. And
I'm sure you didn't know at the time, being so young.
Not at all.
What was going on? Go ahead, Kelly. Yep.
Oh, I was just going to... So did you find yourself, instantly scared of the things that were happening at that time? Or do you think you were young enough that you just... you knew something different was happening, but...
I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, early on, I was just kind of curious. It wasn't until I started having the same nightmare for weeks on end that my life changed. I mean, it actually, this entity mutated in its pathology. And so I had a nightmare. It was the same nightmare every night of the week, the same nightmare, but it was always in black and white. And it would have a young man sitting on a park bench, a picnic table. And then I would be walking towards him. He would turn around and notice me and then put a gun in his mouth and pull the trigger. And so then I would wake up in a cold sweat, and there would be just a profound presence hovering in the room. And that was my introduction to this. So, I kind of had a crash course in this field.
Yeah, I would say that's putting it lightly.
Yes. And so, even though I was young, one of the only ways I was able to find some stability was to understand this phenomenon as a language and not just as something that was traumatizing me. And so I would kind of think about it, why am I afraid? Is it projecting fear upon me, or am I feeling my fear for no reason just because it's an unknown entity? I didn't know what it was. Right. So, that's what drove me into demonology as a discipline and trying to understand what this is all about, what the end game is, and what they're really after.
Now, you come from a strict religious family.
Do you really have to stay out of my head, Shay?
We share the same brain, Kelly. Did you have family support? What did anybody else in the house experience this?
No, they didn't. Matter of fact, it wasn't until we were moving out of the house that my dad pulled me aside and said that he really believed that someone had died a violent death in the home. But he never really got into detail in terms of what he did or didn't experience.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, there were nights where I would be terrified and I would actually wake up to hearing voices have a full-blown conversation over my head.
Wow. Yeah.
Did you try talking to your parents about it? I mean, did they know what was going on with you then, or?
Yes. Oh yeah. Because I had failed 1 or 2 grades during this period of my life, and so I was going through it. I would literally stay up all night with my lights on, and for some reason, and this has to speak to what this phenomenon is about, because for some reason I felt the best, I felt the safest when the sun came up. And so during the school year, the sun gets up like 6:37. I would have 40 minutes of sleep, and then I would go pass out at school. So it was difficult, but more than anything else, I learned to use this as a language and really manipulate it in terms of that being the way I coped with it. Because it was there. It was with me when I went to bed. It was there in the shower. It was present all the time.
It was just part of your being.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, since you mentioned demonology, I think this is a very important point to make for listeners. You don't use the word demon. You use the word debook. Is that correct? Could you explain the difference, in your opinion? Like, what's the difference between the two?
Well, systematic demonology is basically what most people believe in, and that's the idea that these entities that possess people are fallen angels. They're what I call horns and hooves. Now, the term and concept of a debook or a dybbuk, it's just the word dybbuk is a Hebrew word meaning to possess or to cling to. Now, the difference between a demon and a dybbuk is the fact that a dybbuk is a disincarnate spirit. It's someone who was formerly human, and so their ideology is different. So when they would possess people, like let's say in the 16th century, it was in a province in Israel called Safti. But when they would possess people in Safti, most of the time it wasn't for malevolent reasons. It would be something simple like, can you go and bury my body? And then I'll leave this individual, And so my approach to demonology is that linguistically, we're not dealing with fallen angels. Even historically, the Bible doesn't say that. The exorcistic rites were written for human beings.
And just so we're clear and the listeners understand, when you're talking about fallen angels and the demon, you're talking about non-human entities. They were never human. It's just
correct.
Okay.
But when you said dybbuk, you said that it is a spirit that at one point had been human?
Yes.
Correct. It was formerly human. In the exorcistic rites of what's called the sprinkling waters, it comes directly out of the book of Numbers, chapter 19, and it was never meant to be to cleanse someone of demon possession or horns and hooves. It was literally designed to cleanse someone from what's called corpse pollution.
That sounds gross.
This would get really bad tonight. Maybe it will. Maybe we won't get into some stuff. But so that the whole exorcistic rite, even in Catholicism, was designed to cleanse a demoniac from being possessed or being in touch, literally, with the deceased individual.
So, is there a difference then, in your opinion, between a dybbuk and just a jerk spirit?
No, there isn't really, because you have good debook and you have bad dybbuks. I'm going to use that word and say it differently just so people understand. Some people call it different things, but you'll have a good spirit and you can have a bad spirit. But that term, the concrete generic term, just means a possessing entity that was formerly human.
So that's kind of what sends it into the different categories. It's one that isn't just residing on its own. It wants to maybe affect a person.
Yes, and that's what I would call the serial killer entity.
Okay.
Because his pathology and victimology is different in that he doesn't care about transient possession. He doesn't just pick people out of the crowd. He has a specific way of life. He has his own victimology. He's ritualistic and he's brutally intelligent. And so those entities are a whole different ballgame. They're very, very difficult to get rid of. And most of the time, they eclipse the demonologist that's dealing with them.
So, sorry, I'm going to ask a million questions because I've never heard of it from this way. So an exorcism was written to cast out a demon, and if this isn't a demon, it's just a jerk spirit. An exorcism still works to get rid of them?
Exactly right. And that's what I'm writing in my second book. Well, here's what we've done as demonologists. What we've done is that we have based the exorcistic rite, or the validity of the exorcistic rite, on the rate of its success and not on the reason for it. And so we high-five each other saying, see, the entity left, not realizing that that entity is responding to scriptures written towards mortals. And so if we are cleansing these demoniacs of corpse pollution, it will work, even though we may not understand why. Does it make sense?
I think it does.
Yeah, so it'll work, But
it's kind of like that. It's like it's not being used correctly, but it's still getting the job done. So people keep using it.
That's correct, 100%. And so this whole idea of corpse pollution is just it's a very, obviously it's a gross concept, but it's fascinating because it is in that same chapter in Numbers chapter 19. That the idea of cleansing a house was introduced. They would actually go into homes and smell decomp, just like I did as a kid. Mm-hmm. And one way they would cleanse it is through exorcistic rites. They would actually encounter what they called miasma, which is a Greek word for bad air. We encounter it all the time in the field, all the time. So, it's a fascinating phenomenon to research. It really is.
Yeah.
So if it's just a spirit, let's say that you ran into a spirit because that didn't believe in God, mm-hmm. and you're basically doing an exorcism, you or whoever obviously mm-hmm. is doing an exorcism that says God commands you to leave. Mm-hmm. If I'm a person who doesn't believe in that, I'm just going to laugh at you. So does it? Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Do you find that it works all the time, or does it matter what that spirit believed?
Okay, so according to my research, the data sample speaks to the fact that when people die, that their religious system, their worldview, is what I call self-inherited. So when they molt their body and they possess someone, you're going to witness memory in motion. And so the data sample is full of possession cases where you would have an atheist. And so they would have to go and use fumigants and put it up to the nostrils of the demoniac in order to get rid of that entity. So more than anything else, it's what did they believe in? What did they have a fear of? And I think that should drive our research more than anything.
We're only 20 minutes in, and I'm loving the conversation.
I'm fascinated.
I am too.
I feel like I'm grilling you, and I'm so sorry, but I'm so fascinated. This is an entirely new way of looking at things for me, because we've always just said, in my way of thinking, there's good spirits and there's asshole spirits, and then potentially, maybe, 1 in a million, there's a demon out there, Right. But, I guess I've never, knock on wood, encountered a spirit that's trying to take over a human, so that's probably a good thing.
It is.
Go ahead.
When you're in the presence of what we would call a demon, it's still a disincarnate entity, but it's like you're sitting in front of a serial killer. I'm talking the IQ's through the roof. It's ritualistic. Mm-hmm. It has its own currency value. It will scar their victims. This is fascinating. Like the incubus cases written and basically recorded by Father Sinestrario the Mino. He was a Franciscan priest. He was in a home within an hour of an incubus case. And what he did, he actually really assaulted a woman. But he had collected, this is incredible, because it redefined my entire understanding of this phenomenon and what spirits are. He had collected samples of human substance, wink, wink, from the bed within an hour of the event. So if these are spirits in terms of what I thought growing up and in my religious tradition, then it falls apart. And so the question that always rings in my ear, what's the end game here? Why are they trying to get their victims pregnant? And I know that's a random direction, but that's a fascinating aspect of my work here.
It's very interesting.
So has there been cases?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, 100%. Matter of fact, and this gets even more chilling, Sinistrari, along with Montague Summers, they both agreed that the succubus entities were milking the carcasses of the recently deceased for human biological substances.
Ew.
They're necromancers, guys, working with an incubus who would then go and find a living embodied woman and try to plant it in her womb. What's the end game here? What are they creating, right? And so, in my research of possession phenomena, I've come to the conclusion that they're trying to recreate a body that looks like their apparition.
In the effort, you think of then possessing that body?
100%, as a necromancer. And so the difference between these serial killer entities I have termed the molters, the difference between the molters and this seemingly immature species that we encounter sometimes, the difference is alarming. When you deal with a serial killer entity, they are self-seeing. So they will possess people just so that they could see through their eyes. It's an amazing phenomenon. And we even have on record the BTK killer who did that during some of his murders. Is this okay to talk about?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Our shows are explicit. You can say whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't crossed any lines so far compared to normal.
Okay, so the pathology of these molters is quite chilling in and of itself, because it's not just enough to possess people. It has to be physical. Matter of fact, Father Sinistrari had a victim, and this individual had actually died, but it was a victim. This individual was a victim of an incubus. He had peeled back her eyelids and found scarification underneath her eyelids from that entity. So it's not just the act of intercourse. It was the desire to implant in the living womb substance. What are they after here, right? They're recreating a new body for themselves.
To totally
and it's not
take
just
over.
Transient.
Yeah.
Right, it's not just transient possession anymore. It's a completely different ballgame.
This is a long-term con.
This is, yeah.
So, Mom and Dad had a question. She says, do you feel sick or weak people are easier targets for these entities?
Mm-hmm. Yes, they're predators. And so, I mean, I've had cases where they've killed animals. They'll suck the life out of a rat. I mean, these entities, see, we got to understand something in terms of my discipline. We're dealing with necromancers. The reason we cleanse demoniacs of corpse pollution is because these entities are taking pieces from their victims that they're killing and sewing it onto their flesh. Now, where am I getting that from? I'm getting that from the book of Ezekiel chapter 13, when Yahweh called these entities soul hunters. He said that those who should live die, and those who should die live. And these entities would wait until someone goes to sleep, steal their soul, kill them, and then cut a piece off their flesh off, and then sew it onto their corpse. In an effort, it's called skin grafts.
Huh.
Yes, so
Go ahead, yeah.
Matter of fact, I know you guys are well aware of what an attachment is, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the book of Ezekiel chapter 13, there's a reference back to an ancient physician, I guess an ancient way a physician would do a skin graft. That's what they're doing. And it was called attachments. So these entities are taking things from us to place upon themselves and to add to their own existence. And that's why when we go into homes and we smell decomposition, that entity is there.
Okay. So if I can't remember the term you used, but the ones who are trying to create a body just like the one that they had so they can possess that body.
Correct.
You call that a special type. So what's a normal Divik, if you can say normal?
It's just
what did they intend to accomplish?
It depends on who they are. We have cases, like I said, in Softy in the 16th century where they would possess people to solve their own murders. Matter of fact, it was one man who possessed a person, told the police and told the government, hey, listen, this is where my body is. This is who killed me. And they went in and interrogated the murderer. He confessed because that entity, that ghost, had been haunting him. So we're not dealing with horns and hoofs. We're dealing with some sort of afterlife phenomenon. It's not new life discovered. It's old life discovered in a new way. At least in my opinion.
In those situations where, like, they would, like you were saying, they would possess a person to help solve their murder, when it's solved, do they leave on their own, or do they still have to be exorcised?
Most of the time they leave on their own. And so one of the great gifts that Isaac Luria and Jaime Vital, the two great Kabbalistic exorcists, one of the great gifts that they gave us in this field is the understanding that you can heal the person by healing the entity within them. And so it wasn't just holy water and the banishment of an unwanted being. It was, why are you here and what do you want? And the more cases we have of that phenomenon, the more we can see into their world and what it is they value. You know what I mean? I mean, they value being buried. Here's something that's pretty chilling. Since we're in the month of October, there was a widow in Softy who was possessed by her deceased husband. When she walked up to the exorcist, he saw that entity curled up in her womb in the fetal position, which led the exorcists at the time to ask the following question: is possession pregnancy? And we're missing a portion of this phenomenon that is glaring right in our eyes.
All I can think is Rosemary's Baby. Sorry.
Exactly.
But
exactly right.
That's all
Mama
I can
Pat
think.
loves that movie.
That's all I can think, yep.
So this kind of goes with one of Darren's questions, and it fits right in for this question. He's always asked the question, when a pregnant woman goes on investigation, is it safe for the mom and or the baby? So I'm going to expand on that. Based on what you're saying, that spirit is looking to inhabit somebody else, is a baby in danger of being possessed in the womb?
I wouldn't think so. Here's why. I'm going to say no. Here's why. Because the concept of them creating what is called a social skin, it originated in the book of Genesis chapter 6 in the Bible. Now, in all of my research, I kept getting conflicting reports on what actually happened. Now, I came across a manuscript called the Apocryphon of John, and it was preserved by Egyptian monks. This is fascinating, guys. It said that these entities first came to earth and first manifested to women in the appearance of their husbands. And so these entities would go in, just like an incubus, would go into the home at nighttime, look like the husband, gain consent, move that woman into intercourse. Now, this is what it says. This is incredible. At the moment of conception, it would stare directly into the woman's eyes and then revert his apparition back to what he truly looks like. We demonologists did not understand why it was they were doing that until we realized that they are within an ancient belief system. And that was an ancient, what's called obstetric tradition. Obstetric means it's just having to do with childbirth and fertility. But they believe that whatever the woman is focused upon at the moment of conception, she will create the material image of in the womb. And that's how they begin to create a body that looked like their apparition. Isn't that a chilling narrative?
It is. It's kind of scary.
Right.
We have another question from Darren in the chat room. but I'm going to hold off on that one for a second. I'll tell you his question, but I just want to get because I think through my research, you do exorcisms, but you don't do them in the stereotypical fashion.
Correct. That's correct.
So can you explain how you do exorcisms different than the stereotypical before we get to his?
Yeah, I see. In order to answer that question, we have to understand how they groom their victims. Before we conform to them, they will conform to us. And during that conforming to us, it's the grooming stage. It's the love bombing stage. What that entity does is it will send thoughts to the demoniac until the demoniac cannot tell the difference between their own and that entity's. Does it make sense? And then
by the demoniac, you mean the person that's
right.
that might get possessed or that is in the process of being possessed.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So what I do is by the time possession occurs, that individual has completely given their consent to this entity, and that entity is literally wearing them like a garment. And so what I do is I give them their consent back by saying, especially with suicide and low self-esteem, that these emotions are not yours. And once that individual begins to loosen that grip that it has over them, once they get their consent back and they say, you know what, I don't want this anymore, that entity is illegal and it has to leave. Now, I usually do what I call them suicide cases, because for some reason, the spirit of suicide is attracted to my calling. And so I've had cases where people have had, it was either full out possession or an attachment of suicide. And what I do is I talk to that spirit in them by talking to them. It's what's called a Lurianic rite from the 16th century. But that's how I do it. Not to say that the Catholic ritual doesn't work. We've discussed that. But.
Right. Is it a matter of what the demonologist or believes? I mean, like, if you were to try to do it a way you didn't believe, would it still work?
I think that there would be entities that would have issues with it because, they don't have a fear of what I'm doing. They don't have faith in what I'm doing. And so there are other ways you can use other amulets. Here's what's fascinating too, guys. In 1999, we had a case in Baghdad where it was a Jewish boy that was possessed, and he was possessed by a Muslim. And so the rabbi's quoting the Torah, but the entity wasn't responding. So he had to go to the neighboring city, get an imam. And once he began to quote the hadith, that entity left. So we have to understand that this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. You know what I mean?
Yep. Darren wants to know, and if you can't go into detail, too much detail, that's fine. He wants to know what was your toughest case?
It wasn't my toughest. It was the most disturbing. I'll say that. It was a murder case. And I talk about it on every show because it left an imprint on me in every way imaginable. This entity was the father-in-law of the victim. I'm sorry, actually the father of the victim, who had died and possessed his own granddaughter. And she had confided in a friend, and that friend.
I heard the story. Sorry.
Okay. I was like, wait a minute. But so when that friend was in the house, you could hear, according to the husband, you could hear a male disembodied voice coming out of that girl. And once I got in there, you could feel that entity. It was so strong, I felt like it was going to hit me, or it was going to hurt me, honestly. So when I got in there and cleansed the home, you could literally see the darkness leave. It was like somebody turned the light on. And you could see it go through the wall, like up the wall. It was gone.
I can almost picture that, not physically with my eyes, but I think we've all been in locations where it just feels heavier. Right. And then when it lifts, it's a dip. So that's how I'm picturing it in my head. Is it almost the same thing?
Exactly right. It was a moving moment. Everybody was crying. You could feel peace enter that home for the first time. And, the darkness left. Matter of fact, I was at a restaurant like a month after that, and I was sitting next to the social worker that was working the case, and I didn't know it. And so she asked me what I do, and I didn't mention names, and I would never do that. I just said, this is what I've recently done, and this is what I'm working on now. And she goes, oh, I've heard of you. She said, the night you left that house, that entity left the jail because it was manifesting to these young women as an incubus. And so when I kicked it out of the house, it had to remove itself from the children as well. So it was a fascinating case, but that was my most disturbing one because you're dealing with an entity who, if it could, it would kill you.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
Oh, yeah.
So Mama Pat is asking, other than a ritual, how do you find out what has motivated a Dybbuk to try to possess someone?
According to the Lurianic rite, you would ask. See, we're used to exorcisms being the banishment of an unwanted being, but that was always the last resort in history. It wasn't the first gun you pulled, right? It was, okay, if nothing else works, we're going to get rid of you. And I'm afraid that what's happening is that we're creating repeat offenders because we're not really sure why some of these entities are possessing people. All we're doing is kicking them out. And then, just so they can possess someone else. So what I do is I look for what they value. Specifically, you're going to deal with an entity that has its own belief system that's operating off of its own memory. And so you have to understand, okay, what are you after? So one of the things that Isaac Luria taught his exorcists to do was obviously to ask the name, but how did you die? What do you remember? Why are you here? They even got to a degree where when the entity would leave, it would either break a window or it would tear a piece of the toenail off to let the exorcist know that it's no longer there.
Wow.
Isn't that nuts? Ain't it crazy?
Wow.
I mean, this stuff is pretty deep. It really is.
You're an empath, correct?
Yeah, I have empathic notions. I don't really know what I am, honestly. I just know I have something.
Can you feel not only humans, but if somebody's, let me start over. If somebody's possessed, can you get a sense
Yes.
empathically, psychically, however you want to describe it, of,
Sure.
is that what you mean by asking? Can you also pick up on cues by feeling it?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a very good question. Most people ask me if I ever get attachments from my cases. I don't. I get forerunners. I've had apparitions come to me before I had a case, and I couldn't place them until I actually got a phone call and go to the house that it exists in or that it belongs to. So, I do have an empathic nature. There are times when I've had people call me and they're facing suicide or their child has been facing some trauma, and I will tell them their daughter's name. This is what I see, bam, bam, bam. And so for some reason, my calling allows me to see into the darkness to where my eyes can adjust. And it may be because of what I grew up with, but whatever it is, it's really added a lot to me and my ability to help people.
So it sounds like you have some form of mediumship also, possibly, if you have forerunners, as you call them.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right. So here's an odd question for you.
It's an odd question.
Yeah.
Okay.
We know that being empathical can help you in this field, but does it ever put you in more harm's way, being empathical, working with this type of entities?
It can. I've had it happen more than once. More so when an entity feels threatened by you. Like I've had cases where I didn't even know I was in a case. I would just be out to eat, and someone would come to me looking for help, and that entity would project a lot onto me. And even when I would get home, I felt sticky. I would have to take a shower. I would have to kind of recenter myself to get rid of its presence. But I think that young people who have empathic natures are especially troubled by these entities because they're easier to feed upon. There's a sensitivity there that most people do not have. And so that's why a lot of them deal with attachments, especially in their youth.
Huh. So you already said you think people that are weak or I forget the way it was worded earlier.
Sick or weak or
are easily targeted. Do you think they're easily targeted for different types of entities, a certain type?
If they target a weak individual, even somebody who has had past trauma or abuse in their life, it's because they either want to kill that individual or they want to possess them. Or if they're an incubus, they want to get that person or that woman pregnant. So those are the three options. These entities, these serial killer entities, they do not waste time. If they're in your home, even as a poltergeist, they're there for a reason. And they're waiting until whenever they want to, they will gather their memory into one place at one time. And that's usually when they want to act, like they want to do something. In my case, it was the murder case. That entity wanted to kill someone. And so he laid low, right? He didn't manifest until he wanted to. And at that moment, it just gathered all of his memory. It gathered his consciousness at one place at one time. And now you have a really, really bad thing going on.
But as you said earlier, you have to kind of let them in, right? You have to open that door a little bit.
Correct. There is a measure of consent that is present. The data sample speaks of it highly. And these entities will groom their victims just like a narcissist would. So they will love, especially a man and a woman. If it's an incubus, it will groom a woman like a narcissist. We have cases where it would whisper in their ear at nighttime. It would lay next to them. It would play with their hair. So there's a measure of consent here that they're looking for. And so usually in possession cases, I have to ask, okay, what are you involved in? Is there drug abuse? Is there substance abuse issues? Have you ever tried to commit suicide? Have you ever had an abusive experience? Like, did your husband beat you or something? Because these entities will use
that as a weakness.
Exactly right. Use that, manipulate it, whisper into them and say, you know what? You're not worthy. And so that's how these entities will cause their victims to conform to them. It's a very sick phenomenon.
So this kind of goes with it. Mama Pat wants to know, how about people who have mental illness, depression, etc.? Does that make them even easier targets?
Yes, it does, especially depression. Depression is usually it's going to end up in suicide. At least that's what these entities intend on doing. And there's going to be scarification involved. Now, I was sitting at a dinner table one night years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, and a friend of mine, he knows what I do. And this is going to show you how these entities work. He brought a young woman to me with her boyfriend, and he said, Nate, he goes, she really needs your help. And so I said, okay, what's going on? I put my book down and whatever. So she said, my best friend needs your help. She said her grandfather was chased out of his home by an entity, by a demon, and he fell out in the lawn, had a heart attack, and died. And she said, now my best friend is scared to go into the home. Obviously, who wouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
And as I'm talking to her, I see this smoky cloud descend on her, like a blanket that just enveloped her. And I said, I do believe that your friend needs help and I can help her. But I said, there's also another young lady here that has an attachment of suicide. It was her. When I said that, she began to cry. She put her head in her boyfriend's lap and just cried like a baby. Then she held her hand out, put my fingers on her wrist, and I felt the scarification of that entity where she had tried to slit her wrists a year before. That's the young girl that needed help. Here's what's crazy about it. I said, so most of these, especially suicide attachments, most of them are family. They're familial. And so I asked her, who in your family has committed suicide? It blew my mind. She said it was my grandfather. So what that entity had done is it had silenced that girl into submission, and to the point where she didn't even know how to cry out for help. And so by the time she got to me, it had confused her so much so. All she knew was there's a girl that needs help, and there's a grandfather involved. Isn't that fascinating?
She didn't realize it was her?
Right. Exactly right. That entity left her.
Very sad.
Yeah, that's how they work. That's the serial killer pathology. Before we conform to them, they will conform to us. And it's such a chilling aspect of this. But I think once we understand that, it will help us weaponize our gifts even further.
Kind of off subject here, but we see a lot of new demonologists popping up, and in my opinion, even the ones through the Vatican. So, why do you think this is happening? And do you think because there's more demonologists that there's more
yes,
exorcisms going on and possessions, and why do you think that is? If you have an opinion on this,
for sure, absolutely. There's a gross darkness that has overshadowed this world, and the possession cases are skyrocketing, and the Vatican can't get enough exorcists. And not only that, the exorcists that they're training right now, it's a different generation, and so they do not have the same, I guess, work ethic. I don't want to say work ethic, but they're not as passionate as the old ones, like Gabriella Morth and Malachi Martin. There's a difference in generation here. And so that's one of the reasons why they actually opened up, the Vatican did. They opened up their exorcist conference for other denominations to join and be trained by them, because we're experiencing a flood of possession.
Can I interrupt just for a second?
Yeah.
You want to explain, just in case anybody's listening, the Vatican, and you're saying to open up to other, I can't even think. The Vatican is Catholic, right?
Yeah. What they
and
do,
other dominate. What would that be? Just so they are aware of what you're talking about.
So, like, usually it's always been Catholics. So you can't go to the conference unless you're Catholic. Right. You have a Catholic bishop sign your application and everything. Well, now it's different. They've actually opened it to, evangelical ministers. You know what I mean? So you'll have a Baptist pastor there or a Pentecostal pastor who's actually at the Vatican being taught by these exorcists. It's pretty cool, honestly. But it goes to show you that we're experiencing something in this world right now that's unprecedented.
Especially because I grew up Catholic, so the Vatican going from keeping it hush-hush right. to all of a sudden it seems more and more and more you hear about it.
Exactly. It's I'm sorry. Good.
Go ahead.
I wasn't going to say anything. I didn't know what I was going to say.
So we're talking about the Vatican and allowing more exorcists, but what kind of, I'm maybe morphing this into the way that I believe things. I mean, you were saying that the spirit and or the person doesn't necessarily even have to believe in God in order for this casting them out to work. So, I mean, kind of based on the way that you believe things, that it's not truly a demon, it's just a jerk spirit. Mm-hmm. Would they have to go through the Vatican to be trained to do the, quote, exorcism, or? Very
good question. That's a profound question. And the truth is no. The answer is no. But the Vatican is rooted in what's called systematic demonology. And it's not even really ancient. I mean, they changed their demonology in the 16th century. So during the same time period as Isaac Luria was living, dealing with disincarnate entities in Safdi, Israel, the Vatican said, you know what, we're going to change our understanding of these entities and say, you know what, they're all fallen angels. And that theory is okay, but the data sample doesn't speak about it. You know what I mean? It doesn't say that. So I think that, to answer your question specifically, I think that you can be trained outside of the Vatican and still be a successful exorcist. You know what I mean? It can happen.
And I guess in my way of thinking, and I know I keep going back to this thought, my frame of mind, but like we're getting to where more and more people aren't necessarily Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if we're going to start seeing more and more possessions that wouldn't pay any attention to a typical Christian exorcism.
Correct. And that's been going on through centuries now. Father Sinister Avamino, he encountered entities that were pagan, completely pagan.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't care about anything. They wouldn't respond to amulets. They wouldn't respond to holy water. And
right.
You know what I mean? So that does happen. And that should tell anyone in my field, hey, listen, maybe we have to figure out what's really going on here. You know, because if these entities mutate, because I see them like a disease, guys. If they mutate, and we don't understand it, we're not following their mutation, they could change, and we'll be left in the darkness groping, trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, it does make sense to me. Because that's I always wondered if stereotypical exorcisms, like if it was the person that was being possessed and the person performing the exorcism, if they just had to believe enough, even if the spirit didn't. Mm-hmm. Like, so that kind of clarified things for me too.
That does play a role in it. I'll tell you what's fascinating, guys. In addition to all of this stuff, one of the main ways the ancient exorcists got rid of these entities was through fumigants. And so they would light a candle, or they would burn sage, or they would burn a root in the nostrils of the possessed individual, and that entity would leave. So there are things that these entities respond to that are not necessarily religious. It seems to be almost like a biological response instead of a belief system.
Do you think different entities, I think you already said yes, but different entities you need different ways to deal with different entities?
Oh yeah, 100%. And the reason behind that is because you have entities that have lived and died in one portion of history. And so their understanding of the world is different than that of somebody who lived back in the day. So they're gonna exist. So to answer that question, like I've encountered entities who have their own language preference.
Wow. And how did that go?
It's fascinating. You're dealing with an entity who's literally operating off of memory. And so you'll have entities who, for some reason, they're not aware of the Virgin Mary, because maybe they've existed in the time frame where the Virgin Mary wasn't even believed in yet, right?
Right.
And so when we try to use those amulets against it, it doesn't understand what they are, and it will not respond because it's memory in motion that we're dealing with here. It's incredible.
Wow.
It almost sounds like there has to be a certain level of belief, not just from, kind of like a threefold belief system: the person doing it, the person receiving it, and I guess twofold. But it's like, and we've talked about this before in some of the panels that we've done, where we've said, people are protected by whatever it is that they believe in. If I believe that throwing a bagel at your head is going to cast out a demon, it may work, but you almost have to have the person who's getting hit by the bagel believe it too.
Yeah,
otherwise they're just going to chuck a bagel at them. So.
No, it plays a big hand in this. And if anything, this speaks to a phenomenon that is in many ways far deeper than perhaps we think it is. Because if these entities are trapped between worlds, they are disincarnate, then what's the end game? You know what I mean? Like, what are they after? What are they truly after? And some of these entities are transient. They'll pick somebody out of the crowd. They have no victimology whatsoever. So, we have to approach this as afterlife phenomenon. And in doing so, in my mind, that would open up other doors of, would actually give us tools to use that otherwise we wouldn't have. One of them is psychology.
Nice. That's a good answer. I liked it.
So let me ask this question. Do you ever, so if people understand the way that you believe, or regardless of whether they think it's a typical possession or the type of possession you're talking about, do you ever have people come to you that say, I'm possessed? And when you start working with them and feeling them out, if you're empath and just kind of learning about it, you're like, no, you're just a little nuts.
I've had cases where one in particular was interesting. As a kid, he was about maybe 19 years old. I say kid, I'm 32, but he wasn't a kid. But he's like, he goes, I'm possessed. He said it's transient, it comes and goes. He said, so can you drive to my house and meet with my mom and help get this thing off of me? I said, well, it's an hour and a half away, and I'm not getting paid for this. I don't want to. I don't want the money, right? But just make sure that when I do get there, that you're willing to let me help you. And he said, well, he goes, to be honest, he said, I really don't want help. He said, because when I'm possessed, it speaks to me and it shows me things about people that I would not have known otherwise. And that's that consent aspect to it. It's literally, these entities will literally lay on their victims like a garment.
Wow.
Matter of fact, if you go to the earliest pictorial tradition of the Dybbuk, it's a skeleton laying on a man. Literally, the man has a crutch, and he's walking with it, and there's a skeleton on his back. That entity, and that's what it means. The Dybbuk phenomenon is about an entity clinging to people. It's crazy.
So I have a weird question for you then.
Okay.
So basically, you're saying that these spirits will take possession and control the person. They're talking, their body actions or emotions. They basically take over them.
Correct.
So if you have a psychic medium, whatever you want to call me, let's just say me, because this happens to me, I channel spirits, which basically mean they take over. I still have somewhat of a hand on the wheel because I'm a control freak, but they're in charge. I mean, there's sometimes that it's happened that there was one of the times that I was doing it that I guess I woke up crying, and it was because of the story she was sharing, and I was feeling her emotions and having her memories. And I mean, it wasn't me, it was her. So is that how do you view that?
I would not call that possession. I would call that a projection of consciousness. Possession is when it steps in you. Projection is when it pushes like a feeling, an emotion to you. Does it make sense? It's not the same. Possession is when they commandeer the consciousness to a point where you walk where it walks. You do everything it wants you to do, and it's almost like you're in a vehicle. It's in you. You know what I mean? So you'll do whatever it wants you to do. You'll go where it wants you to go. And at that point, he's wearing you like a garment. So to answer your question, I would consider that not possession, but projection. Because I've had people who I've met at restaurants or out at a mall somewhere where I can pick up those emotions and feel and actually see memories and get names. I'm not possessed by them, right? I'm feeling them. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I mean, it's a very interesting story.
Well, and yeah, that makes absolute sense, because that's honestly how I get most of my messages, is the cognizance. But with the channeling aspect of it, it's not me talking anymore. It's not me moving my hands. It's not me. If I would walk someplace, it's not me that made me move.
Right.
I mean, I say that even as I'm saying it, I'm like, but it is me, because I know I'm protected. And if it was ever dangerous,
and that's
the
the
things
difference.
that protect me would step in and stop it. But
right. The true possession, or what Malachi Martin would call perfect possession, is when that entity, it's 100% in you. It's no longer an exterior entity. Now it's 100% within. And now you're going to have a manifestation of memory that doesn't belong to the victim. That entity will manifest everything it believes in. And that's how you know. I mean, people ask me all the time, okay, so how do you know if you're dealing with the molter? Because the molter will not just commandeer their consciousness. It will perform rituals in the home. just like a necromancer would. That's why they're taking small articles from, like, let's say this, in a malevolent haunting, we have cases all the time where they're taking small articles of clothing or toys, and we couldn't find them until we opened up a closet, and they're all in there. So these entities are very ritualistic. So it's not just a commandeering of consciousness. It's also, how are they using that? How are they manifesting themselves?
Yeah, and that's the difference with me, is it's not that they're ever having me do any specific task. It's just they're telling their story and speaking through me.
That's exactly right. And I've had similar things happen to me with people who are living. You know what I mean? I'll just be sitting by them, and I'll get images and voices and stuff. So it's fascinating. It's a fascinating subject.
I was just curious how you would view that, because I know there's some people who's watched that when that's happened, and they're like, oh, don't you think you're possessed? No. No, I really don't consider it possession.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so...
Yeah, we have a few more quick questions here, because we kept them over an hour. By the time we get through with these, it'll be even longer. But there's tons of questions we missed tonight, guys, and we're very sorry, but the show's only an hour, but we do have a few more in here, so we're going to try to get to them.
Awesome. Let's go.
All right, so Mama Pat, kind of back to what I had said earlier, she said, do you rule out mental and physical issues prior to ruling out problems in that area, before proceeding to considering a possession?
Absolutely. Especially if it's like an incubus case, because there are cases where the husband and the wife are fighting, and it's not a real incubus. You know what I mean? It's just there's a presence there it's not even a presence. It's just the fact that they're growing apart and they don't know why.
It's just an energy. Yeah.
Exactly right. There's a funk in the air. So, there are ways to kind of dwindle cases down to only the most authentic. And one of the ways that I do that is, what's happening in the home? Is it hitting you? I mean, is it affecting you? I had a case where it was an incubus case where the entity literally punched the husband square in the face and gave him Bell palsy.
Good Lord.
So at that point, you already know what's going on. You don't even have to ask questions. It's just like, okay, here we are.
Yeah. Mama Deb was asking, do you feel practicing witchcraft is related to demonology?
It depends on what kind of witchcraft it is.
I was going to say, what's your definition of witchcraft?
Right. Well, here's the issue. For all of those readers out there, go pick up a book. It's called Eros and Evil. It's by R.E.L. Masters. And in this book, it's an incredible compendium of witch cases where these entities would look for intercourse with their, women, I guess we'll call them witches, but at that moment, they're using these people. It's not just, okay, I'm a witch, or I'm doing this ritual or doing that ritual. That entity is using people more than they're using it. And at that point, it kind of changes. It's not just, okay, I'm performing this or doing that. Now you're in a consensual relationship with an entity who, if it wanted to, it would kill you. It could kill you. And so that's the fine line. In Eros and Evil, we have cases of quote-unquote demons who were circumcised. I'm just going to throw that out there because this is interesting, guys.
Huh?
What?
I'm sorry. Can you say that again?
Exactly right. In Eros and Evil, we have case studies where these witches were encountering quote-unquote demons who were circumcised. Now, there's a problem here, right? See, we cannot get the right...
I can think of a couple.
Exactly right. That's the same thing I thought when I got into this. I'm like, oh my God, when I first read that book, I put it down and I just thought to myself, like, man, we're missing something here. But matter of fact, Montague Summers had a case of a woman who she had an incubus lover, and his appendages, there were 3, and they were metallic.
Oh.
So what we're witnessing, at least in my research, and we won't have time to get into it tonight, we're witnessing aspects of the UFO abduction phenomenon.
That just threw a whole nother.
I know.
You're gonna have to come back for a part 2 because.
Sure.
But this is why I said we had to start with the basics, so people understood where you were coming from and understood your views before.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it totally changes the whole subject matter for some viewers if they know where you're coming from.
Exactly right. And it should. I mean,
Yeah.
There has to be a measure of intellectual accountability in terms of the research, because we can't ignore the data samples here. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Christian tradition, so I was taught that they're demons and that they're immaterial and that they're spirit. And that's like, wait a minute. If we have demonologists that are collecting biological substances off of victims, where are they getting this from, number one? How are they preserving it, number two? See,
and what job description did they answer to take? Never mind.
Exactly right. Imagine arguing with God. I didn't want to do this. But, I mean, just the entire discipline of demonology has to be deeper in terms of research. I mean, we have ancient demonologists that they understood so much about these entities that one concluded that these entities will manifest through coagulated water, where they will take particles of water out of the air, solidify it into the shape of their apparition. It's fascinating.
So I guess because we've said demonologist several times here in the last couple of minutes, I guess it keeps running through my head as you say that in reality, you're kind of not a demonologist, because it's not demons that you're dealing with most of the time. I mean, do you feel that that's the proper title for you, or do you feel like there's maybe a different title that would suit you better, but demonologist is what people understand? And
well, it's a very good question. See, it's high time that my field grows into a new vocabulary. And so I do believe that the term demon is a dogmatic, antiquated reference to whatever people used to fear in history. It could be famine. It could be a headache. So right. While I'm researching this and growing into my own understanding and revelations in terms of what this is, I understand. To be honest, I think that the term demonologist fits because that's what they called these entities. Even if they weren't fallen angels, they were demons to them.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was a demon to the ancient man and woman. It was just an entity that was evil. It could have been, disincarnate or horns and hooves. What I'm doing is I'm taking it a step further and saying we can still use the term demon, but understanding who these entities truly are.
Got it. All right, last question from chat. Have you ever had an exorcism go wrong?
Mm-mm.
No?
No. And I've had people that have had that happen, especially in the deboot phenomenon, where they used to actually beat demoniacs until that entity would leave.
Well, there you go.
Right? That's how primordial we were. Yeah. And so thankfully we've evolved in our tactics and less people are dying. That's a good thing.
I learned some stuff here, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you throw out your social media so people know where to look you up and find you?
Yeah, for sure. My website is njgillis.com, and I'm on Instagram as the Nathaniel J. Gillis, and I'm on Facebook as Nathaniel J. Gillis. So you guys can hit me up, follow me on all my social media. On my website, it's pretty cool. On my website, I have some of my latest research. In addition to that, I have all of my previous shows. So you guys can go back in there and figure out, okay, what show was just on, and even some shows that are coming up in the future.
Very cool. Very cool. If you can hold on for 1 second, Nathaniel. Kelly, you want to do some final shout-outs for me?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have Michelle, of course, Mama Deb, Eye of the Beholder, Darren, Mama Pat, Stephanie, Freddie, Freddie. Scrolling. There was a lot of chat. It was great.
I see Kim and Allison. I see Allison's picture, and Kim just said, "Great show."
Yep. Kim, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
I see they loved you. They're saying interesting guest, awesome guest, great show, great show.
Thank you so much, guys.
This honestly, it was fascinating.
It was. I really want to do a part 2.
Yeah, I love hearing from people who look at things a different way, because I don't think there's anything that you've said that I'm like, oh, that never happens. He's just crazy.
Correct.
I'm just looking at it now with different terms and from a different direction and thinking, so I love these types of guests. You were amazing.
Yes.
Thank you guys. Thank you for having me on. I enjoyed myself.
Thank you. All right, guys, we will be back. Both of us, Kelly and I believe, will be back next Friday.
I believe so.
I believe so.
I think you're stuck with me for a few weeks.
Yes, I believe I am.
Halloween, when I'll be at the stand.
Yep. Next week we were talking about regression, past life regression, and that type of stuff. So with 2 very interesting guests. So it should be a very, very good show. So I hope you guys join us then. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you to everybody in chat. And we'll see you next week.